Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goosejunkies. I'm wearing my super specs tonight because tonight for episode 27, we're going to be facing off some They Live homage horror with Are You Afraid of the Dark's The Tale of the Super Specs against the Nightmare Room's Four Eyes. I'm joined tonight with two fellow panelists that I love deeply, Micah and BD. How are you two guys doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It is your boy, the Horrorlander. What's good? Your number one favorite horror hero. And I gotta equip my brought studio shades. These are the mid blockers. I'm gonna need it for this episode because holy Christ, y'all. It is bright up in here. Let me just say that. But I am excited because these are some very interesting episodes. These are definitely memorable, iconic in their own regard. And yeah, pretty excited to talk about them. So tune in, people.
All right. And how you doing tonight, Micah?
I'm doing pretty well, getting ready to move back into school next week, Saturday. I'm moving back in. And I recently surpassed 300 subscribers on my channel. So, woo!
Congratulations.
Yes, sir.
Sooner than later, both of y'all will be at 1K, hopefully. Let
I'm hoping.
Hey, audience out there, if you're all sub to me and you're watching, go drop these guys some subs and let's get them up to 1,000 subs. All right, by the end of the year, preferably. But if it takes a little longer than that, hey, at least they get there, right? All right, so tonight we have some homage horror, and I feel like maybe we can go on into more of this near the end of the video, but we have a prolific story called They Live from John Carpenter that came out, I think, in 1988. And this was in the tail end of the 80s. So this would have been right around the sweet spot of kids' horror when it first came out in 1992, at least with Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps, to want to capitalize on it. Which is funny because Are You Afraid of the Dark did it, I think, in 92, and then it took almost 8 years or 9 years, possibly even 10, for Four Eyes to come out after Are You Afraid of the Dark's episode of this. But let's go ahead and start off with Are You Afraid of the Dark first. Why not? So I'm going to pass it over to whoever wants to take the tale of the super specs. And why don't you explain what the story is about and what your thoughts on it?
Micah,
I
you
can
want
take
to take
Super
it?
Specs. Yeah,
All right,
I'll take
cool.
it. So, Tale of the Super Specs basically opens up with, I think his name is Gary. I'm trying to remember all the Midnight Society members' names. But Gary it's kind of a fun, way to kind of offer some more introspection on the Midnight Society, outside of the campfire. I thought that was really cool. It's opening up with Gary working at this magic shop or occult shop that his dad runs, talking with, I can't remember the girl's name, but he's talking with another one of the Midnight Society members. And she's kind of telling him, are you going to make another story? Because a lot of these guys say your stories aren't scary anymore. And so Gary basically is telling her yeah, I have a story plan. I'm going to tell it tonight and we're going to see what the guys think of it. And so he starts this story off and there's basically opens with this couple, a girl named, I think her name is, what's her name?
Mary Beth.
Mary Beth and Weeds. And they're a couple who are we're basically a romantic couple. It's pretty clear from the episode that that's what they are. And they're at this magic shop, which is real to be Sardo's Magic Mansion, which is Sardo's an iconic Are You Afraid of the Dark character, for those of you who don't know. And basically, they're kind of messing around with some of the equipment in there. And Weeds finds this weird spell voodoo book, whatever that's in there. And this weird, I think it's called monkey dust or something like that. That he's chanting all these random spells and sprinkling this dust all over the place. And this dust lands on these things called super specs that they find in the store. And Mary Beth ends up taking the super specs and she discovers that when she wears them, she sees these really weird, shadowy, goofy looking morph suit people stalking her around. And she's kind of weirded out by this. And she's trying to figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, Weeds is using this voodoo magic, which somehow works, and is using it to prank people on April Fool's Day. And that's just kind of the way the episode goes for a while, is just Mary Beth using the super specs, seeing these creatures, and just basically trying to explain to Weeds what's going on. And basically, she ends up going to Sardo's shop and Sardo is really funny in this episode. Like I laughed out loud at a lot of his jokes. Like I think he's probably one of the funniest elements of this episode. And he's kind of just like completely BSing like this whole explanation of what the super specs do. And like he apparently somehow is just on the money. Like he gets it completely right despite completely BSing it. And they end up doing this seance with him, Mary Beth, and Weeds. And something happens during this seance, and let's just say it ends on a little bit of a darker note, which I do like a little bit the darker kind of goofy ending, but it works really well in my opinion. And it does end on I love the way it ends with the Midnight Society too, with Gary giving them all the super specs and then basically pranking them. I thought that was a really fun way to end the episode. But that's very brief, very general rundown of what Tale of the Super Specs involves. I enjoyed this episode. I thought it was fun. It's not scary. We're just gonna be honest here. It tries so hard to make these morph suit guys scary, but like they're just guys in black morph suits. There's only so much you can do to make that scary, and you don't do much. I mean, there's a scene where she's looking through them, and you see them playing basketball. And it's the stupidest thing ever, but like in my opinion, it's like a hilarious form of stupid. And like I found myself laughing at a lot of the stuff. I think, as I mentioned, Sardo is hilarious in this episode. Like some of his jokes are really good, and like the whole scene of him basically just BSing what's going on it cracked me up. And I think I like Weeds and Mary Beth as like a kind of a couple. I think they have a really fun dynamic with each other, and while they're not the greatest acted, you can tell it does seem like they got along as actors, and you can tell they kind of had at least some minor chemistry with them. And I just think I don't know, I enjoyed the episode overall. There was some weird stuff again with like the whole voodoo magic thing that just somehow works that's never explained. There's some odd stuff with like the alternate dimensions and all that does it makes it really bad. And I know you guys didn't like it as much as I did, but despite the flaws with it, I think it's still a very fun and enjoyable episode in my opinion. And it's one of those kind of so bad that it's good for me. So I give it like an 8.5 just because I enjoyed it so much. Like
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, no harm, no foul. If you like what you like, sometimes it just hits how it hits, right? Um, so I'm gonna pass it over to BD because I think BD might have a little bit of a contrast to what you just said. What's your thoughts on the Tale of the Super Specs?
This is a rewatch for me. Super Specs was one of the early episodes that I saw in Are You Afraid of the Dark? And maybe not, it tinted my reflection of how I feel about the show. But overall, there are positives to this episode, so I want to talk about those first. Like Micah brought up, Sardo is very funny in this episode. The actor who plays Sardo has a good performance. You actually laugh out loud a couple of times. He's goofy, but he's goofy in a lovable way, so I can see why he's iconic in that regard. And I do like the fact, I mean, I'll be honest. I think that Sardo has more potential than Dr. Vink because Sardo's magic shop, you can always do different crazy plots with that. He's got a bunch of different magic in his books and he's got all these different materials. So that's pretty good. And the episode very clearly has this sort of sitcom charm involving the main characters. The type of humor that they do, the type of antics that they do. It can be corny and kind of cheesy for anybody who's watching it as like a younger viewer of the modern age. But I grew up watching sitcoms. I grew up with that type of humor in TV shows. So it felt sort of nostalgic. It kind of felt like that comfort food when I was watching it. So I very much enjoyed that. And obviously, this is a very important episode because they had an interracial couple, and Are You Afraid of the Dark has gotten accolades and awards and the NAACP award. So this episode was pretty innovative in pushing diversity, pushing the envelope, especially with the main character being called Weeds, sprinkling monkey dust using voodoo magic, and the main villains being people in all black playing basketball. NAACP award, right? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so the main villains in this episode are trash. They are garbage. Yo, the gimp suit globetrotters are not good villains, man. These guys are just in all black morph suits, and the episode is so repetitive because, like my boy is rocking, every time Mary Beth puts on the super specs, she just sees this woman in an all black cloak, which is scary the first time you see it. You're like, all right, that kind of resembles like somebody out of a cult or some type of weird priestess or something. But then, as the episode continues, every time she sees the gimp suit globetrotters and this, high priestess in all black, nothing happens. They just appear, they don't do anything. And as the plot reveals that they're these beings from a parallel universe, you could have had some scary invasion stuff going on, which they hint, but there's no real threat of an invasion. It just more seems like these guys are living their life and Mary Beth is just sort of spying on them. So there's no real threat level. There's no real sense that these are potentially dangerous villains. And like Micah brought up, even Sardo doesn't know what's going on. He's completely bullshitting the whole explanation as to what they are. Turns out to be completely true. And the fact that Weeds managed to conjure up this spell despite having no magic experience and he also bullshitted is kind of a crazy plot because nobody knows what the hell is going on. And then it's left for the viewer to decipher it. And when you decipher it, it still doesn't make too much sense. The episode just feels messy. It just feels like a lot of go gadget bullshit stuff. And the seance sequence just felt really weird because they're trying to enter this limbo dimension and trying to contact them. And then the twist at the end of the episode is actually the reason why I give it a 6.5 out of 10. I originally had this episode as a 6 out of 10. I thought it was boring. I thought it was just meh. But I actually give it a 6.5. I think that the twist ending helps it out. It reminds you of Goosebumps twist endings, but this twist ending is actually pretty clever. It plays into the whole parallel dimension, parallel world plot. So it's actually pretty clever in that regard. So I give it a 6.5 out of 10. This is a decent episode, fine for what it is, but I'm not the biggest fan. Kind of forgettable.
All right, great points. And I just want to build on to what both of y'all said real quick. I think there's some sound positives. I think you both have already touched on it. The historical significance of the episode being kind of groundbreaking for its time, like showcasing an interracial couple on TV, was still kind of taboo early in the '90s, believe it or not. And this show had just like the stones to do it, and it won a bunch of accolades for diversity in television back in the day. And Nickelodeon as a whole was kind of known for this, but Are You Afraid of the Dark specifically won awards for diversity back in the '90s. So that's a really good thing, and kind of shows how far back diversity, inclusion, and all that really does go. It's not just a modern thing. It was back in shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark back in the day. But that aside, I think the concept for this being a They Live knockoff, essentially, I do kind of like the alternate dimension angle they took here. Instead of going with aliens, it's more like there's these beings that are kind of trying to take over the world, but you can't see what's going on. And there is some cool elements that we see Mary Beth kind of uncover as the story goes along, like when she's in her kitchen and she sees a teapot kettle just brewing on her stove top. I don't know what it is about that scene. I find that more creepy than the morph suit people reveals at times because I'm like, why is this thing just going for full kettle blast right now? Like, what in the world is going on here? Uh, then you get the morph suit, of course, but there's elements of that, like being within a world kind of thing that's kind of existential horror, and I don't know, it kind of works in that mild Twilight Zone kind of vibe. But as we all said, aside from the great acting and some good humor jokes from Sardo here, and the concept being cool, they don't do anything inventive with it. Majority of the episode is super repetitive of Mary Beth constantly putting on these glasses, seeing these morph suit people and running away or contemplating to tell Weeds about it. And that's putting aside the problem with the whole story up front is that Weeds pulls the little brother from a Night in Terror tower where he magically knows magic better than somebody who wields magic. He says some random gibberish and he enchants some glasses with some dust. He says some random gibberish and enchants some yogurt to make some girl's voice turn into a chipmunk voice. Like, why is this even in the episode? It's just random, and that's how all the events kick off, right? In Weeds, he's kind of a lovable dummy, essentially. He's not that smart. But Mary Beth, unfortunately for her, the plot doesn't do much with her character other than she's the one that wields the glasses and sees all this phenomenon. And I feel like the story's kind of missing something. It's missing a spectacle to build to, right? All these events that she's experiencing in the episode just feel like it's just happening. and it's not really building into something grander. As a matter of fact, I feel like the story just kind of stumbles into the climax itself when her and her boyfriend Weeds go to visit Sardo to get this whole thing resolved. It feels anticlimactic. you know, there's nothing spectacular about it, and I feel like the end portion is a bit rushed through. And honestly, I think the ending itself is confusing because the whole Deus Ex Machina, like this is one of the Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes that technically have a twist. So if you're unfamiliar with Are You Afraid of the Dark as a show, they're not known for having twist endings. You can call this a twist ending for this show standards. It's a little too ambitious and confusing given the context of it all, and it comes at completely out of left field. like you weren't expecting this to happen at all, and I feel like it's kind of undeserved. But other than those issues, those are pretty much my main ones. I do find this episode entertaining and lovable for some historical things and some character performances, and maybe the concept is intriguing. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite things about it, I think Micah touched on it, is the fact that the Midnight Society bits are way different than your average episode, and I like that it characterizes some of those kids a little bit, yeah, because Lord knows they need it. Other than that, I'd probably give this episode maybe like a 3.9 out of 5 stars, and that's on a bias curve because I enjoy it a little bit more than something else that I normally would give maybe around like a 3.5 or a 3.6, which is just fine. It has some brownie points because this is Sardo's first episode, and I actually think this is one of the better Sardo ones. So take that for what you will. If anybody else has anything to add on, we'll move on to Spongy's thoughts now.
Yeah, I was gonna say before Spongy's thoughts, I definitely think that they should have done more with the Midnight Society. I think it was a waste that they always kept it at the campfire. And seeing that they did have the capability to take them to different locations, that probably would have been a fun way to start off like every episode. Like if you did Dead Man's Float, you could have opened up with them at the pool, or you could have had Laughing in the Dark. They're at the circus, in front of the tent, and they're about to go in, and they're like, no, 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 or maybe like Gary goes into the tent, and then when he comes out, he's like, "Okay, I got an idea for a story," and then he goes and tells it at the campfire. So that probably would have been a better idea.
Oh yeah, one thing I want to interject real quick because this is season one. Are You Afraid of the Dark? This unfortunately has the narrative cuts
Oh,
with the
oh
Midnight
yes,
Society in it, and I'm also
oh
not a
yeah.
fan of that all that much. But I feel like in this episode, it's a bit better because we have more context with Gary, the narrator, than usual. So I actually didn't mind it for once because we got that opening we did. I think it adds more insight into more often than what season one usually did with it. So I'll let it pass for this. But normally that is a detractor with these early episodes. That the dang narrators interrupt the story just to talk amongst their peers. Like, no, just get back to the story. We don't care about y'all. We want the story. So, it is what it is. But let's get to Spongy's thoughts.
All right, let's see what the man's got to say. I already know what he's about to say, but these are his detailed thoughts. All right, so Tale of the Super Specs. He says, I really enjoy this one. Flaws first. The boy's prankster nature doesn't really go anywhere. It just gets us into the plot. Some of the scary scenes, quote unquote, come across as goofy. The threat isn't clearly defined for a while, and the girl screams at the smallest things. It has slight kink, but otherwise, it's so much fun. Sardo's a fun personality, a fraud who still wants your money. This is the first truly comedic episode, and it works. The jokes are actually funny and got a few actual laughs, not ironic ones. I even laughed at a fart joke. That's impressive. The kid actors are pretty good, especially the boy. He's kind of an ass, but the actor makes it mostly charming. The silliness extends to the scenes, which adds to enjoyment at least, and there's some solid tension later on, with Ron Oliver's direction helping with that. We get a rare dark ending that brings solid nightmare fuel and an interesting idea when we see what is going on. I wish the logic was a bit tighter and some parts were tweaked, but as a whole, it was so much fun on purpose, even. It's goofy in all the best ways and even has a few scares in there. Highly enjoyable. Not sure where you got the scares from, but I do agree that ending helps out the plot. I mean, that was probably my favorite part of the episode.
I think the scariest part is how jarring some of these outfits look differently from each other as the episode goes along. They don't stick to the same morph suits. It just like it feel like they change, kind of like the mask of Michael Myers and Halloween H2O. They just get progressively worse as the episode goes along.
The only scary part of the episode is when the Gimsuit Globetrotters are about to jump Mary Beth. And I've been in Chicago. Getting jumped by a bunch of basketball dudes is pretty scary, man. That brings back nightmares.
Okay, so I guess we're kind of all on the same page, around the same page. Like none of us are negative on super specs at all, which I think is a good jumping off point to Nightmare Room's answer of the They Live homage. And BD, if you want to take this one over, why don't you tell us about Four Eyes?
So Nightmare Room was obviously based off the R.L. Stein book series, Nightmare Room, and you have a lot of episodes that are based off that. Some of the famous one we knows are like Locker 13 and such, but there were episodes that were TV originals, and Four Eyes is actually a TV original episode. There is no book adaptation. So this episode follows the main character named Jeremy, and Jeremy is basically getting a new prescription for glasses. He's never worn glasses in his life, so this is the first time he's gonna get it, and he's got his best friend Cindy with him. Cindy's obviously kind of just like doing your typical best friend ragging. She's kind of making fun of him about how he'll look in glasses, but she's reassuring him that everything will be okay. And he's got your typical like sitcom humor where as soon as you get glasses, your entire life ends. Like everyone's gonna make fun of you or something like that. That never happens, only in the TV shows like this. So what ends up happening is he gets the glasses and they're about to head out. And Cindy wants to go shopping at the mall. So he decides, all right, let me tag along with Cindy. But as he's walking back and he has the glasses on, he runs into this homeless guy. And when the homeless guy turns around, it has this reptilian monster face to it. And he's like, whoa, 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 why is this monster in front of me right now? And he runs away. And when he basically encounters Cindy, he tries convincing her, like, yo, this homeless guy that I ran into, he was a monster. Like he was a creature. Like well, I just ran into him. And she's like, what are you talking about? I don't see anything. And she's not able to see it. And she thinks that he might be going crazy. And then she tells Jeremy, you know what, maybe you're not used to getting glasses yet. You know, I had a friend who got a new prescription and she thought that she could see the air. And he's like, okay, maybe I'm not used to these glasses, which somehow correlates to me seeing monster faces because that's what happens when you acquire glasses, clearly. So then he goes to school, and obviously the kids are kind of ragging on him. You got some bully characters who like smudge his glasses. And shout out to my man, bro. I gotta give Jeremy credit for this. He stood on business. He stood on business, man. He took his water bottle and straight hosed that man in the face. I was like, yo, he stood up against the bully. And then he gets sent to the principal's office. And the principal is like this notorious mean principal, your typical school trope. And when he gets there, he runs into the principal, and oh my God, what a shocker! The principal is a monster. Got the same reptilian face going on and is approaching him. And Jeremy's freaking out. He's like, yo, somebody help me. And then he runs out of there. And you get this actually genuinely funny scene where he trips in the hallway and the assistant to the principal goes, what did you tell the kid? Like, I thought that was pretty funny. I said, yo, what'd you do to that man? And he ran out of there. And that's when Jeremy finds out these glasses allow me to see these monsters and these potentially aliens. And there might be some sort of alien invasion going on. He suspects that since these glasses allow me to see specific people that are disguised as monsters, that these are specific entities that they're trying to hide amongst us. There might be some alien invasion takeover thing going on. And he goes back to Dr. Young. Dr. Young was the one who originally gave him the glasses. And when he gets to Dr. Young's office, he sees a trench coat in the closet, and he flashes back to a scene in the school where this random dude in a trench coat was approaching him in the hallway because he somehow got into the school. And that's when he ran to the principal's office. So he realizes the dude in the trench coat was Dr. Young, and he might have been trying to warn me about something or get me. And that's when Dr. Young comes up to him and he goes, Jeremy, you don't understand. I gave you the wrong glasses. And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm seeing monsters all over the place. And he's like, I know. They're aliens. They're taking over. They start off as these miniature organisms, but inside of like water and such. And then when they enter the human body, within 30 minutes, they can turn and take over, your being. They can basically disguise themselves as you. And that's when he realizes oh shit, there's actual alien invasion going on. And Dr. Young gets arrested. There's some police officers who take him away right away. They try telling Jeremy, no, 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 he's crazy. He's got, mental health problems. They know him for being wild. And when Jeremy puts on the glasses, he sees that even the police officers in the town have been possessed by these aliens. So he has to find out what to do. And potentially, there might be some problems going on because his friend Cindy is going to be going to this giant like farmhouse party, and that might be the meeting site for where these aliens are going. So he has to find out a way to not only save his friend but potentially save the world, and that's the plot of Four Eyes. So what I think about this episode, I would say overall, I think this one is scarier than Super Specs. I think the actual monster jump scare scenes were pretty good. I like the prosthetic effects on all the people, and I do like the idea of the way of how aliens are disguising themselves as humans, because if you had the potential to basically be the only person who could see these aliens that are shape-shifting, you would be freaked out. That's a pretty scary thought. And the way that there's actual tension in this episode because Jeremy actually has to do something because the people that he knows are being affected and his friend's life is in danger, and maybe even his family members could be in danger. So there's an actual end of the world feeling, which wasn't in Super Specs. Super Specs I think had a cool idea with parallel creatures. In this one it's more typical alien takeover trope, but the execution is scarier in my opinion. I actually like Jeremy as an actor for the most part. I think he does a pretty good job. He's got your typical sitcom kind of kid acting. Cindy is a pretty good actress as well. I think she's actually probably the best actress in this episode. She actually does a good job acting. She's very believable when she's talking. And the one good thing is I actually do believe that Jeremy and Cindy are friends, kind of in the same regard to how I felt that Weeds and Mary Beth were actually a couple. You actually do believe that these guys are friends, and I think they do have a good friendship with each other. But there are some negatives with this one as well. So there's a huge plot hole in this episode. This plot hole is the size of a giant galaxy, bro, because anybody who's watching this episode would have a hard time forgiving this. Why does Dr. Young even make these glasses? And how does he know about this alien invasion? You get no explanation as to why this random glasses doctor who gives out prescriptions made these glasses that are able to see aliens. What does he know about them? How do you know all this information? Do you ever find out? No, because he gets arrested before anything happens. So you're wondering to yourself, well, this is just go gadget bullshit. What's the reason that any of this is even happening? And the glasses sort of got like a weird effect to them. Like, so, so in the barn house, glasses got stomped on. So you suspected that, okay, the glasses are going to break. He won't be able to see them. For some reason, a dude stepping on his glasses did not break them. It just cracked the lens a little bit. And when he puts them on, you don't really understand if they're still working or not. It's kind of implied that he's kind of able to see still the disguised aliens, but maybe it's like janky, like it's not working all the time when he's looking at people, and then sometimes it's working properly, but then other times you think it might be broken. There's no real consistency on the glasses. So you don't really know what they're capable of doing when they're broken, and that whole scene I just felt was kind of sloppy a little bit. Um, and another big thing is the ending is the twist ending is dark. So I give it props for that. The twist ending is dark, but my God, is it predictable? It was so predictable that when I saw the twist ending, I was like, is that the end of the episode? I know this is 18 minutes. Is there going to be like a little bit more? Nah, that was the ending of the episode. It ends on a very predictable twist. And it did feel a little bit more formulaic. It's not as creative as maybe I would have liked. But I would give this episode a 7 out of 10. I think it's decent. I think that the acting is good enough. You'll have a fun time. I think it is a pretty scary concept. The prosthetic makeup is good. And the scene where he's getting surrounded by people up at the top of the barn rafters, that was a pretty good scene where he falls off and collapses. And the ending is dark. So this is a darker episode. But you just have to be willing to forgive some plot stuff. If you're more, picky and choosy on plot stuff, I think you might dislike this episode a lot more because it is pretty messy. And unfortunately, that's kind of the trend for a lot of Nightmare Room episodes if you've watched the series. So I'm excited to hear the rest of your thoughts.
Yeah, great points, BD. I can't wait to add on to that, but I want to hear Micah's thoughts first. Micah, do you have anything you want to add on to that, or just share your thoughts on Four Eyes?
Yeah, so my thoughts on Four Eyes. I thought it was a pretty fun episode. Again, kind of like Super Specs, I really enjoyed it. I honestly kind of had them tied originally, but I think I give Four Eyes just a point one score higher just because it is scarier. I think the horror elements definitely elevated just a tiny bit more for me. But I like the design of the aliens. I think they're really well done and really creepy looking. I think that first encounter with that homeless guy was actually a pretty freaky scene, like where the alien just like grabs him and is like really violent with him. Is like, ugh, like that'd be a really scary situation to be in. Like, I feel like this is one of those like kids horror scenarios where you would not want to be in Jeremy's scenario because that'd be a terrifying situation to be in. I think that I do like his relationship with his friend. I think they were both well acted. They both had a good chemistry with each other. I think that this whole paranoia idea that Jeremy faces throughout this episode of who can I trust, who can't I trust, who's like, and all this stuff is like very reminiscent of like I know it's kind of we kind of reference John Carpenter's They Live, but that paranoia element honestly kind of feels more like John Carpenter's The Thing, with that kind of whole like who can I trust kind of idea. So that's kind of a parallel I picked up on. And also, I do like the whole idea of these aliens. While it's very random and kind of out of nowhere, the explanation of how this eye doctor knows it, I do like the idea of it, where there's like this tiny organism that like they can just get into with a simple drink of water and you're screwed. Like that's just another really scary concept. It's like because we drink water every day or any kind of thing. So like imagine like something like that where just getting into something you drink or eat can infect you is a terrifying concept, and I think that works that's an effective idea. And I think the twist ending is dark. I like the darkness I always like a good dark twist ending for any kids horror thing. And like the idea that Jeremy, a little slight spoiler, but Jeremy, it's pretty much implied he's dead. He gets killed by these aliens, is a really great way to end it off and really kind of leaves that on a nice dark and scary note. So that's really all I had to say about it. All of the negatives I have are pretty much the same as with BD, so nothing really else to say with that sense. So I enjoyed it. I gave it an 8.6 out of 10, just that one slight inch higher because of the horror elements that Super Specs didn't really have.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm really glad that you brought up the paranoia aspect because I think that is a positive of this episode. Just because like the thing about super specs was like it's otherworldly entities, so it's like a separate threat. But the idea that you can't trust your friends or the people around you does make it a little bit scarier. And Mike actually brought up a good point because it did remind me there is another episode from a TV show, a kids TV show that did do a They Live concept that's similar to this, which was Ben 10, Permanent Retirement, where he was at the
Yep.
retirement house suburb and they were all possessed by aliens, these terrifying, slimy goo aliens. And it was a similar thing there where he didn't know who he could trust. He didn't know if he could trust his grandma. He didn't know if he could trust the neighbors. That would have also been a really fun one to
Yeah.
compare to this.
And even to the point where Max gets possessed too by him, like
Yeah.
that's really where it gets intense. That freaked me out as a kid.
Yeah, the they live concept I think is good for that because there is that, you don't know who you can trust paranoia. So that's a good point.
Yeah, and I guess I'll start off with my thoughts, kind of building on to what was just said there. I think what Four Eyes does better inherently off the bat than Super Specs is kind of building this ultimatum that the character is in, or at least the lead character. In Super Specs, they kind of hint that maybe these alternate universe beings are here as evil entities and possibly might take over humanity, as in Four Eyes, we already see that this is actually going on. This phenomenon is actually occurring, so you already feel the stakes within the story better. One thing I think Four Eyes does, as we've all touched on so far, is that it manages to be creepier than some other versions out there of these They Live knockoffs. And Micah brought up a really good scene when he first encounters a homeless person with his glasses. That was some good stuff. I would even argue the entire barn climax had some creepy moments in there where he sees some of his peers possibly have already been taken over, and then some people haven't. This kind of makes the situation more dire because now he's like, okay, who's been compromised, who hasn't been compromised. You feel that paranoia, you feel that in the moment urgency he's in, and when he breaks his glasses, you feel that panic within him. You can understand why he feels like that, and the dark ending is very good. I think the acting in the episode from Josh Zuckerman. He starred in a movie from Disney Channel I loved as a kid called "Twas the Night" with Bryan Cranston, and he also starred in one of my favorite teen comedy movies ever, Sex Drive. So seeing him in something kids horror is awesome, and then of course seeing the girl who played Cindy, Lindsay Bartleson. She was in one of my favorite sitcoms growing up, Grounded for Life, as the daughter of that show. And seeing her here playing in a kids horror episode is also a delight. They both did fantastic jobs in acting. The eye doctor, he actually plays a doctor on this TV show called Scrubs. So go figure. Going from doctor from Nightmare Room to a doctor in Scrubs is hilarious. So there's a lot of things to appreciate about this episode. Conceptually, you can definitely see where it was borrowing from They Live, at least on the superficial nature of it. I don't think it quite is exactly what They Live was going for. In case you don't know, if you have never seen They Live, it's not just about a secret alien invasion with the main character John Nada putting on glasses with his cohort played by Keith David as they're uncovering a plot to end humanity, essentially, or take it over. It's more about a commentary about subliminal messages and propaganda. That's what They Live is at the heart of it. Is kind of uncovering propaganda and who's been infected, who believes in this crap, kind of thing. And that's what it's trying to say thematically. You don't really feel like these stories, these kids knockoffs, are trying to speak on anything about collectivism or absent-mindedness or being corrupted in that sense, which I think is a big missed opportunity and could make the stories a whole bit richer. But I think as a whole, Four Eyes just has a lot of problems that I feel like some haven't been touched on yet. For me, I think the pacing of this episode, and this goes across Nightmare Room show as a whole, the pacing in this story is atrocious to me. It's just barreling through event after event after event, and there's no pause, there's no breaks, there's no characterization going on. It's just barreling through points of the story. Like we go from him getting glasses to getting bumped into by an alien homeless person to then being at school and seeing a flyer for a party. And it's just so fast. And all this stuff happens within a span of less than 7 minutes. Okay. Just like, let's ease it up. I feel like the idea itself could have been stretched out into a two-parter. There was a grand enough idea. There's a lot you can build on in terms of the mythos that the episode sadly just barreled over with the doctor and that throwaway, random plot reveal that he has all this information with no explanation of how he got it, of any of the backstory. And that aside, there's these visions he sees when he's wearing these glasses of a person in a raincoat following him. And there's a plot reveal in the middle of the episode, so this is not even that big of a spoiler, that it's the doctor trying to stop him from wearing the glasses. Why is he wearing a raincoat scaring the kid? Just whisper over on the side in your actual lab coat and say, "Hey, come here. I need to tell you something about your glasses." Why are you following him around in a raincoat that's drawn up in your face like this so he can't even see your eyes? Like, why is that a thing? It makes like there's some weird things here, and that reveal feels cheap. The climax feels a bit rushed through because pace. And on top of that, there are some other plot holes we haven't touched on. Like, how did the doctor know all this? Well, there's even a bigger one here. And it's kind of ambiguous on a specific character, but there's a lot of predictable red herring things to pick up on with this certain character. I don't want to spoil anything and get in too deep about it, but there's a certain character that ends up playing a major role by the end of the episode in like this recontextualization kind of way, where they might be implied to be the leader. And there's hints throughout the episode that maybe this character is kind of overlooking some phenomenon that the main character Jeremy's going through, maybe on purpose to try to, like, I guess, gaslight him into think that he's crazy. Or there's another side of the coin where it's implied that maybe they aren't infected with this alien virus yet. But there's just so many extenuating circumstances that add up that make you think the former than the latter. And then by the end, you're like, well, it could be the latter too. So it's just confusing on that front too. And then it all stems back down to the pace. It needs a bigger runway to work with. And sadly, it also needs a bigger budget because you can tell that they were stretching themselves thin with this idea, keeping it small scale as possible. Personally, I think the writing could have been a bit better. The budget and the pacing could have been a bit better. Some lazy aspects could have been cleaned up a bit, but nonetheless, it was a valiant attempt at making a good original story for the Nightmare Room. I think it does fit in with the IP, fits in with Goosebumps, even the Haunting Hour as well. Um, in terms of enjoyment, I think I mildly enjoy it more than the Tale of the Super Specs, and I applaud it for more darker elements. So I'm willing to give this thing maybe like a 4.1 out of 5 stars, which is like an 8.2, which is a very good to me, but a light one. And that's where I'm at with it. Anybody else want to add anything before we get to Spongy's thoughts? All right, let's get to Spongy.
All right, let's see what the Sponge Meister got to say. Okay, so he says this episode is a lot of fun. It's not a comedy one. It's just that the way it plays out is more fun and suspenseful rather than scary. They never got to do an episode for visitors, so this is a nice way to have that almost done as one. The Doctor is played by John C. McGinley. Such range, right? And he does recently well. He doesn't have too much to do. He's fine and just sort of there in the end to give him the glasses and tell him what they do later on. This feels fairly close to something Stein would do, complete with the fake out where someone claims to see what is going on, was just kidding around. And it works more to give this a more fun vibe. The suspense is solid as you don't quite know who will turn out to be an alien. The makeup on the aliens look decent, and the female friend has decent chemistry with Jeremy. The cliche bullies weren't needed though. The twist ending is actually well handled, being foreshadowed nicely with a decent surprise. My only real problems are that A, I wanted more explanation as to how Dr. Cox knows of the aliens to begin with, and B, the ending almost feels like a setup for a part two we never got. The climax doesn't quite feel big enough for this to make a satisfying ending, but the nature of the episode makes that less of an issue. Overall, it's a simple setup used to a good effect that makes for a fun episode. Nothing deep at all, but it's good fun with a solid twist. And those are his thoughts. And I can also give the comparison as to who he picks wins. So,
All right, let's do that.
all right. So he says that both are fun takes on this idea. They don't exactly get into the themes from They Live, but they at least tap into the same idea. Four Eyes is more of an idea of not trusting everything you see, though. I'm going with Super Specs overall. Four Eyes is more consistent in places, but Super Specs goes crazier with it. Both have good dark endings, but Specs goes further, and I just did the comedic nature with some creepy bits in there. I'm going with Super Specs. Four Eyes is good, and I can see some leaning more towards it, but Specs is a favorite for me, and the fun stuff it has makes me like it more. Solid pairing here, but yeah, Dark gets the win this time.
Okay, that was expected, but that probably was closer for Spongy than it may have sounded. So I can appreciate what he said there. BD, which one do you prefer?
These ones are pretty on par with me. I mean, even the scores, I kept it pretty much the same because I think they're on the same tier. But I give it to the Four Eyes. I think Four Eyes is just scarier for me. It's got more creepy bits in there. And the main thing I like about Four Eyes is that, again, it has more tension that actually gets me involved in the story because it actually does feel like the main character has a lot of stakes going on. And you do feel the paranoia that he feels. You feel bad for him, and you hope that he can triumph by the end. And the ending is sinister because you put all this weight of importance in saving the day on the kid, and he folded because he's just one kid. He's just one person. He can't save the day. So I think that works out pretty well. I think Super Specs has a better concept, at least. I think Parallel Dimensions is more unique than this. So I would give, I guess, brownie points to Super Specs, but the win goes to Four Eyes.
Okay, Michael, which one do you prefer?
Well, as I alluded to when I was talking about Four Eyes, I think Four Eyes is just a tiny bit better than Super Specs for me. I enjoyed both of them thoroughly, but in my opinion, I think Four Eyes, just because it has that horror element to it, just edged it over a little bit for me. I love Super Specs, but Super Specs was just goofy and silly, which worked for it in my opinion. I thought it was fun, but obviously we're talking about horror shows or kids horror shows here. So obviously having that more of the scary elements edged Four Eyes just a little bit over for me.
Dang. So I'm going to go with the consensus on here so far. It's a 2-1. So I'm perfectly fine giving Four Eyes the victory on this one and giving my vote to that. And I think when it comes down to it for me, I think Four Eyes, in terms of it being an homage to an iconic film, like an outright one, it's not necessarily something like a Stay Out of the Basement where that was kind of ripping on the fly, but going a whole different direction and idea with it. I feel like Super Specs is kind of like that approach, and that Stay Out of the Basement to the Fly approach, except, of course, that episode is like that for They Live. As in, Four Eyes is basically just a kid's version of that, just simplified down. Um, but I do think where it comes down to it is the execution. Like always, you feel more stakes with Jeremy. You feel more horror. It's more believable. It might be worse pace, but at least there's a spectacle to come out of it. At least there's an event that the episode is building towards. At least there's some breadcrumbs in the plot to pick up on. Albeit there's some forced elements kind of thrown in there for exposition dumping because of the plot and time constraints of the episode. But I do think that it has an equally dark ending going for it, if not darker, because of it's more ambiguous and implied that Jeremy, is about to have a horrific fate awaiting him. And it's also, has a little more thematic things going on about who to trust because we see this element affecting everybody around him. It's not just some parallel dimension beings kind of hiding in plain sight that we have no idea how they're going to take over humanity. As in here, we have an understanding at least of how they're taking over humanity, given some explanations. And it's kind of creepy to think about how fast this thing can turn you and how it's going on. As a matter of fact, it really reminds me of the Yerks from Animorphs. It has that element going for it. And honestly, if you look at Four Eyes, it's kind of a blend of They Live and Calling All Creeps. If you took those stories and put them in a blender, there is some Calling All Creeps aspects highlighted a little bit higher in Four Eyes as well. Kind of not making it an outright just rip on They Live. But I do kind of like the blending here, even though sometimes it does show its ugly head because it makes it predictable. But then again, it is what it is. So yeah, my vote goes to Four Eyes. So with that being said, I guess for a quick discussion tonight, since we have some time left, I guess we'll just make it a random discussion about homaging horror in kids horror. I think we might have tackled a similar subject in the past, but the idea for this would be like, what are some stories that you've seen in kids horror that are outright homages of classic films or classic books that are pretty much shot for shot that, but for kids? And is that welcome to you, or do you want more originality with that idea? And I'll pass it to whoever wants to go first.
I guess I can go first because there's one example that I have in my head immediately. And I did actually, I think, talk about this example on an episode we did before, and that's The Ghost of Fear Street, The Tale of the Blue Monkey. So, The Tale of the Blue Monkey to me very clearly is an homage to a very famous short story that's actually going to be getting a movie adaptation next year, which is Stephen King's The Monkey. Stephen King's The Monkey was about an evil monkey toy that was cursed, and within that short story, it was basically about luck. It was the idea that this monkey basically causes bad luck within this family's life. They have some people close to them that die, and they end up throwing it down a well and trying to get rid of it. And when the main character became older and he has his own family, he has a kid and a wife, that monkey ends up returning somehow. And he has to find a way to deal with it before his kid and his family becomes victims of it. And that was actually homaged in Ghost of Fear Street because the blue monkey, the toy in that one, is an evil toy that was created, this furry little monkey, and it actually is a cursed object. It does cause bad luck to happen to the main characters. They have like stuff like fire coming out of a barbecue. There's a knife scene about them getting cut. So there's similar, very similar plot lines involving bad luck. And I actually thought that the fact that the Blue Monkey homaged a Stephen King story in that particular regard did benefit it because I think that it felt refreshing seeing a kids horror take on Stephen King. Stephen King's story is obviously a lot heavier, a lot darker, a lot scarier. Tale of the Blue Monkey homaged the monster, the villain, but then it added its own plot line about the neighbor being an evil toy maker. They did their own spin on it. So I think the positives of homages is if you can do your own spin on it, if you can take something that's meant for like adults and turn it into something that's for kids horror and modify it so it fits, or vice versa, if you take a kids horror concept and you make an adult version of it, but you spin it to actually make it work, I think that those are actually pretty good. And the one good thing about it is, let's say me, I'm a fan of Stephen King. I like his story, and I read The Monkey first. So when I read The Blue Monkey after, I appreciate The Blue Monkey more as opposed to somebody who may have never read the Stephen King Monkey story. They might think that Blue Monkey is mid, or they might not like it as much as I did. So I think that that's actually a positive to there. But there is negatives that come with homages. If something is blatantly ripping it off and they do like a shot for shot inferior version, that can basically take it away. Tales from the Dark Side, Bigelow's Last Smoke. Anyway, there's certain versions where homages don't work out. It just feels like you're straight up copy and pasting and you didn't put in the effort. But from the homages that I've seen, Four Eyes, Stay Out of the Basement, Blue Monkey, I think so far in kids horror, it's had a pretty good track record overall. So that's my take on it.
Nice. All right. Yeah, I like the examples that you brought up. Micah, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
Well, I would say my biggest example that I can like think of at the top of my head that I'm familiar with is Say Cheese and Die homaging a most unusual camera from Twilight Zone. Now, we covered this back in like last October for one of the episodes. I was not a fan of Most Unusual Camera. I don't think I'm just not a big fan of that old Twilight Zone show all that much. I don't know. It's a little too artsy, I guess, for my tastes in horror, and it's a little too subtle. And but I do love the way Say Cheese and Die does it. It's so far of the 12 books I've read, Say Cheese and Die is my favorite. I think that is just I love the idea of this camera that basically is cursed and makes bad things happen to the people whose pictures are taken. And I just think that that concept alone is an improved version of what Most Unusual Camera did, which was just a camera that basically predicts the future. It doesn't really necessarily make the future a bad future until like that last picture that's taken. But, you know, that concept alone, I think, while it worked for Twilight Zone, was still kind of weak overall. And I think Stein took that and improved it and made the concept a lot scarier with Say Cheese and Die. And yeah, I just think that's the best thing, kind of like what BD said, that's the best way to do an homage to a classic horror property is to take it and do your own original spin with it. So it's obvious what you're homaging, but you're not just straight up ripping it off.
Yeah, and I think some examples that fit what you're saying, Micah, for me would be actually a Are You Afraid of the Dark episode that I quite love. It's called The Tale of the Water Demons. It quite literally is John Carpenter's The Fog. But the added element is that instead of it just being this mist coming from the coastline of the victims of a shipwreck haunting a town and killing people and all that, it's brought upon in the tale of the water demons from this treasure hunter who collects relics, and when he goes to sleep, that triggers the fog phantoms to animate and come into the real world and try to come into his domicile and attack him. That's the idea that I'm more gravitated to. I love John Carpenter's The Fog, and I love that this story is homaging it, but it has a new spin on it that was refreshing, right? And that can be said into any just long lasting subgenre in horror in general. Like you can look at any werewolf or vampire story and you can point out that one's derivative or that one does something new to the idea. But there's always going to be a tried and true formula to how vampires operate and how werewolves operate. You're not going to see a vampire that's a daywalker without some explanation, right? There's always going to be some aspect of they sleep in a coffin, they don't like garlic, or they're allergic to this, whatever, and they usually hunt at night. Werewolves, you need a full moon to be a werewolf. I mean, there's hardly any circumstances that are going to break that idea, but you can do different concepts like werewolf skin, where they have a full moon that makes them werewolves, but they can take the skin off and wear it kind of like a costume. So there's a new spin on that, right? You can take something derivative or borrow something from something that's iconic or maybe one of a kind at its time, like something like They Live, which was a movie about two reluctant heroes getting into a plot to destroy humanity, and they uncover secret propaganda that's brainwashing people and essentially getting them poised and ready unknowingly, that is going to get them ready for this alien invasion takeover at any point. So they have to put a stop to it. That's why stories like Four Eyes resonate, is because that concept works. Maybe Four Eyes doesn't do something new to it, except kind of blending it with Calling All Creeps, but you still kind of see it there. And the homage and the taking from something uh, is there. It makes it work. I mean, you brought up Twilight Zone, Micah. Um, that was done numerous times in Goosebumps. Like
Mhm.
Night of the Living Dummy and Say Cheese and Die, within the first 10 books, those ideas were taken from Twilight Zone. I mean, The Girl Who Cried Monster was taken from a fable. Stay Out of the Basement was ripping on The Fly, like BD brought up. I mean, it's one of those things that you can be, especially in kids horror. I see that there's a lot of similar ideas in every series. You can look at the knockoffs, the throwbacks. There's always similar ideas, like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark. I mean, this is what this podcast does. We compare shows with similar concepts, right? They're all pulling from the same influences. They're all pulling from, or at least similar ones. But it's how you differentiate it from the source that you're influenced by, or even your competitors, that make you stand out, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I can hardly think of how it makes you worse, other than if we look at something like, I don't know, computer horror back in the 90s, and you can compare something like Killer Computer to The Tale of the Virtual Pets, where you're like, you can see that lost in translation there of them
I was
trying to
also I
pull
was
off
gonna say
that.
the monkey's paw in that one episode we did for Are You Afraid of the Dark, the TV pilot.
Oh yeah, the Twisted Claw. That's pulling from the monkey's paw. And that's a classic one that gets pulled from a lot. Be careful what you wish for is even pulled from monkey's paw. So there you go. I mean, the list goes on. We could probably sit here all night and pull them out. But
And I was also gonna say too that like you mentioned it, you brought it up that doesn't even have to be adult horror to kids horror. They homage kids horror to kids horror sometimes, like Curious Camera, Say Cheese and Die, Secret Admirer, Dead Body, Vampire in the Neighborhood, Nightly Neighbors. So sometimes you got series that are just homaging each other, but a lot of the time they do their own twist on it, their own thing. So as long as you spice it up, as long as you make it different, it can work out for you. Just make sure that you got a good team of writers. Execution is always what matters.
yeah, execution over concept. That's what you should take away from this podcast at the end of the day. That's what really matters, and that's what's going to make your product stand out over the competition 9 times out of 10. Unless you're just so entertaining and lovably bad or lovably good that you just have impervious armor to anything critical. That's normally how it's going to be. So yeah, that was episode 27. We appreciate you guys hanging around and hearing us talk about kids horror for about an hour. This is why we do this podcast, and we love to hear you guys' feedback. First and foremost, let us know down in the comment section down below. What is your thoughts on what we covered tonight? Do you like the Tale of the Super Specs more? Do you like Four Eyes more? Do you like John Carpenter's They Live? What are some of your favorite homages in kids horror that you think need more uh, discussion around? We're dying to know. I'm going to put Micah and BD's information, like usual, and Spongy's as well, down in the comment section and in the description of this video. Please go follow their social medias and check their channels out. You can find BD over at the Horror Lander. That's his new handle on his YouTube page. And you can find Micah at the Ultimate Goosebumps Man. That's his YouTube handle. You already know me, Goosebumps Completionist. And if you're not sub to me, feel free to sub as well. But I want you to sub to these guys, like I mentioned earlier. Get these guys to 1,000 subs. Come on, let's do it, y'all. So with that out of the way, for episode 28, we're gonna move into pool horror. So we're gonna go. We're getting towards the tail end of summer, so we want to get one last summer comparison out there. And we've decided to do Are You Afraid of the Dark versus The Haunting Hour again. But we're doing one of the most iconic Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes of all time. We're going to be doing The Tale of the Dead Man's Float. And we're going to be facing it off against Haunting Hour's Pool Shark, written by Neil Shuster. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, we hope you liked this episode. And we hope to see you next time in our next installment and future installments out there. Take care and have a great night.
Deuces home slice.